The gravel bit into her palms as she hit the ground. Cassidy Thorne tasted copper where her lip had split against her teeth, felt the sting of Carolina humidity against fresh scrapes on her forearms. The sergeant's boot planted itself inches from her face, close enough that she could see the dried mud caked in the treads. His voice came down from above, thick with contempt, calling her something that would end careers if the wrong person heard it. She did not move, not because she could not. Major Cassidy Thorne had disabled men twice this sergeant's size in rooms that did not exist in countries that would deny her presence. She stayed down because she was already cataloging. 2 witnesses at the guard station, both junior enlisted, both frozen. 1 security camera mounted on the gate post, angle suggesting it captured everything. The sergeant's name tape clearly visible on his chest. Crenshaw. She filed it away with the same cold precision she used for target coordinates. In 6 hours, this man would be standing at attention in front of General, learning exactly who he had just assaulted. But right now, Sergeant First Class Wade Crenshaw had no idea that the woman in civilian clothes picking herself up off the concrete commanded a unit that did not officially exist. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed someone being underestimated because of how they looked. Cassidy rose slowly, deliberately, brushing gravel from her jeans with movements that betrayed nothing of the calculations running through her mind. She had driven onto Fort Bragg through this gate hundreds of times. Today she was returning from Fayetteville, from a conversation with her father that had gone exactly as poorly as she had expected. Her Honda Civic held no government markings. Her clothes, a simple blouse and jeans, held no indication of rank. The common access card she had presented showed her name and confirmed her authorization to enter the installation. But Crenshaw had not bothered to look closely at the details that mattered. 20 minutes earlier, everything had been different. She had been stopped at the edge of the visitor parking area, window down, when a minivan pulled up beside her. A woman in the passenger seat looked exhausted, 2 children squirming in car seats behind her. The driver, a young man in army dress uniform, was clearly lost. "Ma'am, we're trying to find a family readiness center," he had said. "My wife needs to get the kids registered before I ship out tomorrow." Cassidy had smiled and given them detailed directions. Turn left at the chapel, follow the road past the commissary, look for the building with the blue awning. She had wished them luck. The young soldier's wife had mouthed thank you through the window, and something in her tired eyes reminded Cassidy why any of this mattered. That warmth had evaporated the moment she reached the main gate. Crenshaw had been hostile from her first word. He had taken her ID card and studied it with theatrical suspicion, turning it over as though searching for evidence of forgery. "This does not look right," he had announced, loud enough for the junior guards to hear. "Step out of the vehicle for secondary screening." She had complied. 14 years in the military had taught her when to push and when to wait. She stepped out calmly, hands visible, and asked what specifically concerned him about her identification. His answer had been a sneer. "You do not ask questions. I ask questions. You answer them." She had remained silent, watching him circle her vehicle, making a show of inspecting it for threats that did not exist. The performance was designed to humiliate. She recognized the type. Men like Crenshaw used whatever small power they possessed to remind others of their existence. "I would like to speak with your supervisor," she had said when the inspection theater concluded. That was when he shoved her. Now, standing upright with blood on her lip and fire in her chest, Cassidy made a decision. She could end this man's career in the next 30 seconds with a single phone call. She could have operators from her unit at this gate in 4 minutes. She could watch Crenshaw's arrogance crumble into terror as he realized exactly how badly he had miscalculated. Instead, she walked back to her car. Crenshaw's voice followed her. "That is right. Go home and let the real soldiers handle things here." The junior guard nearest to her, a private first class whose name tape read Ostrowski, would not meet her eyes. His face was pale. He had seen everything, and his expression suggested this was not the first time he had witnessed Sergeant Crenshaw in action. Cassidy started her engine and drove through the gate without another word. In her rearview mirror, She watched Crenshaw laughing with his subordinates, enjoying his petty victory. He had no idea what was coming. The compound housing her unit sat behind 3 layers of security fencing on the far side of Fort Bragg, unmarked except for a simple numerical designation that meant nothing to anyone without proper clearance. Cassidy parked in her usual spot and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel, allowing herself 30 seconds to feel everything she had suppressed at the gate. The anger came first, hot and familiar. Then the humiliation, which burned worse. Finally, the cold resolve that had carried her through situations far more dangerous than a bully with a badge. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her lip had already begun to swell. There would be no hiding it. Captain Delia Vaughn was waiting outside the operations building when Cassidy approached. Vaughn had served as her second-in-command for 2 years, a former Ranger who had earned her place in this unit through performance that silenced every skeptic. She took one look at Cassidy's face and went still. What happened? Cassidy gave her the short version as they walked inside. Gate guard. Got physical. I handled it. Vaughn's jaw tightened. Handled it how? I drove through the gate and came here. They entered the operations center where the rest of the team was gathered for the afternoon briefing. Staff Sergeant Jerome Banks looked up from his laptop, his greeting dying on his lips as he registered her appearance. The others followed his gaze. Silence spread through the room like a cold front. Banks rose slowly from his chair. He was 6'3", built like he had been assembled from spare tank parts, and his voice came out dangerously quiet. Who? Cassidy held up a hand. Stand down. All of you. I am handling this through proper channels. Professionals. Banks repeated the words as though they tasted wrong. Someone put hands on you, Major. On our commander. And you want us to file paperwork. I want us to do this right. She moved to the front of the room, assuming her briefing position despite the circumstances. Because if I let you handle this the way you want to handle it, we become the problem. We give them the excuse they need to say we are out of control. I will not give anyone that satisfaction. The room remained tense, but her people held their positions. They had followed her into firefights where the odds made survival a statistical improbability. They trusted her judgment even when it demanded patience they did not possess. Vaughn stepped forward. At least tell us his name. Cassidy considered the request. Sergeant First Class Crenshaw. Gate Security. Banks typed something on his laptop. His expression darkened as he read. Wade Crenshaw. 16 years in service. 3 failed Special Forces selections. Currently assigned to Installation Access Control. He looked up. This guy's been washing out of everything that matters for a decade. That does not give us the right to handle this outside regulations. With respect, Major, regulations did not stop him from assaulting you. No, but they will stop him from doing it again. To me or anyone else. She dismissed the briefing and retreated to her office, a small room with no windows and walls lined with maps of places that officially did not concern American military personnel. She sat behind her desk and allowed herself another moment of stillness before pulling up the digital form for reporting an assault. The questions were clinical. Date and time of incident. Location. Description of events. Injury sustained. Witnesses present. She answered each one with the precision she applied to after-action reports, stripping emotion from fact until only the bones of the encounter remained. When she finished, she submitted the report to the Judge Advocate General's office and sat back in her chair. Her phone buzzed. A message from Vaughn. Banks found something. Crenshaw has had 3 other complaints filed against him in the past 2 years. All from women. All withdrawn or dismissed. Cassidy stared at the message for a long moment. 3 other women. 3 chances for the system to work. 3 failures. She typed a reply. Then we make sure there is not a 4th. An hour later, a response arrived from the JAG office. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Fitch had been assigned to investigate. She wanted to schedule an interview for the following morning. Cassidy confirmed the appointment and was about to close her laptop when another notification appeared. This one sent ice through her veins. Sergeant First Class Crenshaw had filed his own report. According to his account, he had been performing routine security duties when an unidentified woman in civilian clothes became belligerent, refused lawful orders, and physically threatened him. He had been forced to use minimal physical contact to maintain control of the situation. He was requesting that the woman, whose identity he claimed not to know, be banned from the installation and prosecuted for assaulting a military police officer. He was claiming she attacked him. Cassidy read the report twice, letting the full scope of his lie settle into her understanding. This was not merely a bully trying to cover his tracks. This was a calculated attempt to destroy her before she could destroy him. He still did not know who she was. He still thought she was some random dependent or civilian contractor, someone without resources or connections, someone who could be silenced with a fabricated counteraccusation. He had no idea that the woman he just accused of assault commanded a unit whose very existence was classified above his pay grade. But he was about to find out. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Fitch had the kind of face that revealed nothing. She sat across from Cassidy in a sterile JAG interview room, a digital recorder between them, her pen moving across a legal pad with mechanical efficiency. She had been asking questions for 40 minutes, circling back to details, probing for inconsistencies that did not exist. "Walk me through the moment of physical contact one more time," Fitch said. Cassidy kept her voice level. "I asked to speak with his supervisor. He stepped forward and shoved me with both hands against my shoulders. I fell backward onto the ground. I did not attempt to strike him or resist in any way." Fitch made a note. "And you're certain you did not make any movement that could have been perceived as threatening?" "I am certain." The JAG officer looked up from her pad. "Major Thorne, I have to be direct with you. Sergeant Crenshaw's account differs significantly from yours. He claims you were verbally abusive, that you refused multiple lawful orders, and that you raised your hand as if to strike him. His account is false. He also claims the security camera at that gate was malfunctioning and did not capture the incident." Cassidy felt something cold settle in her stomach. That camera was operational. I saw the indicator light. Fitch's expression remained unreadable. "I have requested the footage. Base security is reviewing their systems." The interview concluded with Fitch promising to be in touch as the investigation progressed. Cassidy walked out of the JAG building into gray Carolina morning, her mind turning over the implications. Crenshaw had moved fast. He had filed his counter-report and was already working to bury the evidence. That required either remarkable instinct for self-preservation or experience covering his tracks. Given the 3 previous complaints, she suspected the latter. Her phone buzzed as she reached her vehicle. Vaughn's name on the screen. "Major, we have a problem. Banks just heard from a buddy in the MP unit. Crenshaw is telling everyone who will listen that some officer's wife tried to assault him at the gate, and now she's crying assault to cover it up." Cassidy closed her eyes. "He still thinks I'm a dependent. He thinks you're nobody, and he is making sure everyone else thinks so too." Across Fort Bragg, in the Security Forces headquarters building, Wade Crenshaw was holding court. He stood in the break room, surrounded by 3 other NCOs, a cup of coffee in his hand and satisfaction on his face. "You should have seen her," he was saying. "Entitled. You know the type. Probably married to some captain who tells her she is special. Thought she could roll through my gate without proper respect." One of the NCOs, a staff sergeant named Mullins, leaned against the counter. "And she actually swung at you." Crenshaw waved his hand dismissively. "She tried. Got in my face, started making threats. I put her on the ground before she could connect. Minimal force. Textbook. And now she is filing charges. Let her." Crenshaw's smile widened. "My word against hers." And the camera happened to glitch right at that moment. Funny how that works. The others laughed, but one of them, a younger sergeant named Torres, did not join in. He stared into his coffee cup, his jaw tight. "What about the kid who was on duty with you?" Mullins asked. "Ostrowski. He see anything?" Crenshaw's eyes hardened. "Ostrowski knows what he saw, and he knows what happens to gate guards who contradict their NCO." The laughter resumed, but Torres slipped out of the break room without a word. Colonel Marcus Tidwell reviewed the competing reports in his office that afternoon. As the commander of base security forces, the situation landed squarely in his jurisdiction. He had known Wade Crenshaw for 8 years. The man was rough around the edges, certainly. Old school. But he had never given Tidwell reason to doubt his integrity. This Major Thorne, on the other hand, was an unknown quantity. Her file showed an assignment to JSOC, but the details were sparse. Probably some staff officer pushing papers in a classified building. The kind who thought her position entitled her to special treatment. Tidwell picked up his phone and called Fitch. "Sandra, what is your read on this?" "Too early to say, Colonel. Their accounts are completely contradictory. We need that security footage. Crenshaw says the camera was down. I know what he says. I want to verify it independently." Tidwell frowned. "You think he is lying?" "I think I do not reach conclusions before I have evidence. But I will tell you this. I pulled Crenshaw's service record. 3 previous complaints from female service members. All dismissed or withdrawn." Tidwell was quiet for a moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting we get that footage before anyone has a chance to make it disappear permanently." She hung up, and Tidwell sat alone with the uncomfortable feeling that this situation was more complicated than he wanted it to be. That evening, Private First Class Danny Ostrowski sat in his barracks room, staring at the wall. He had watched Sergeant Crenshaw shove that woman to the ground. He had seen her face, calm and controlled, as she picked herself up without retaliation. He had heard Crenshaw's slur, the one that still echoed in his memory. And he had said nothing. His phone sat on the desk beside him. He could call the JAG office. He could tell them what really happened. But Crenshaw's words kept replaying in his head. He knows what happens to gate guards who contradict their NCO. Ostrowski was 22 years old, 18 months into his first enlistment, and terrified of the man who controlled his duty assignments, his leave requests, and his entire existence on this installation. He picked up the phone, then set it down again. Tomorrow, he told himself. He would figure out tomorrow. The rumors spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire through dry brush. By the second day, the story had mutated into something Cassidy barely recognized. In one version, she had screamed profanities at the gate guard for 10 minutes before lunging at him. In another, she had threatened to have her husband end his career. A third claimed she had been intoxicated, stumbling and slurring as she demanded entry to the installation. Staff Sergeant Banks heard the whispers in the chow hall. He sat alone at a corner table, methodically destroying a plate of scrambled eggs, while 2 sergeants from a logistics unit traded gossip 3 tables away. "I heard she went completely psycho," one of them said. "Like full meltdown." Crenshaw had no choice. Banks set down his fork. His knuckles whitened around the handle. "My buddy in the MP unit says she is some kind of Karen," the other sergeant added. "Married to an officer, thinks the rules do not apply to her." Banks stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. The 2 sergeants looked over, saw the size of him, saw the look in his eyes, and suddenly found their breakfast very interesting. He walked out before he did something that would prove Crenshaw's narrative right. Cassidy learned about the rumors from Vaughn, who delivered the report with barely contained fury. Vaughn paced the length of Cassidy's office, her boots striking the floor like hammer blows. He is controlling the story. Every hour we wait, his version becomes the official truth. The official truth will come from the investigation. What investigation? Vaughn stopped pacing. The camera footage is supposedly corrupted. Ostrowski has not come forward. Colonel Tidwell thinks you were some entitled spouse. Crenshaw has 16 years of relationships on this base. You have a classified file that nobody can read. Cassidy absorbed the frustration without flinching. She understood it. She felt it herself, a constant pressure beneath her ribs that made it hard to breathe. But she had learned long ago that pressure was just information. It told you where the cracks were, where the system might break. You could let it crush you, where you could use it to find the weak points in your enemy's position. "What else did Banks find on Crenshaw?" she asked. Vaughn pulled out her phone and scrolled through notes. Failed Special Forces selection 3 times. First attempt was 12 years ago. Second was 10 years ago. Third was 8 years ago. Each time he made it through the initial phases, but was dropped before completion. Dropped for what? The records do not specify, but there are notes from the selection cadre recommending against future attempts. Something about attitude and compatibility with modern special operations culture. Cassidy filed that information away. A man who had failed 3 times to become what she had become. A man who watched others earn what he could not. That kind of resentment did not fade. It calcified into something harder, something that looked for targets. That evening, she made a phone call she had been avoiding for 2 days. Her father answered on the 3rd ring. Cassidy. His voice carried the same gruff distance it always had. Did not expect to hear from you so soon. Something happened. I wanted you to hear it from me before it gets back to you through other channels. She told him about the gate, about Crenshaw, about the investigation. She kept her voice steady, professional, the way she delivered briefings to generals. When she finished, the silence on the other end stretched long enough that she checked to make sure the call had not dropped. Finally, her father spoke. You should have identified yourself. Told him who you were. I should not have to identify myself to avoid being assaulted. That is not how the army works, and you know it. If you had just told him you were an officer, a commander, this whole thing would have been avoided. And the next woman who comes through that gate without stars on her collar. What about her? Her father sighed, the same sigh she remembered from childhood, the one that meant she was being difficult, idealistic, naive. Maybe if you had stayed in a regular unit, learned how things actually work instead of running off to play special operator, you would understand how to handle situations like this. Cassidy felt the words land like shrapnel, tearing through old scar tissue. Good night, Dad. She hung up before he could respond. The phone buzzed again almost immediately. Not her father. Lieutenant Colonel Fitz. Major Thorne, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. There has been a development. What kind of development? Fitch paused. I found something in Crenshaw's service record, and I located a witness who is willing to talk. A woman named Sergeant First Class Diana Pruitt. She filed a complaint against Crenshaw 18 months ago. She withdrew it after her deployment orders were suddenly changed to a location she had specifically requested to avoid. Cassidy's grip tightened on the phone. He retaliated against her. I cannot prove that yet, but Sergeant Pruitt is willing to tell me what happened to her. And Major, there are 2 others. 2 more women who filed complaints and then went silent. I think Crenshaw has been doing this for years, and I think someone has been helping him make the problems disappear. The line went quiet for a moment. This is bigger than one incident at a gate, Fitch continued. If I am right, we are looking at a pattern of assault and institutional cover-up. And you might be the first person with enough rank and enough protection to actually stop it. Cassidy stared at the wall of her office, at the maps of places that did not exist, at the career she had built in the shadows. Then let us stop it, she said. The morning brought news that landed like a blow to the chest. Colonel Tidwell had reviewed the competing accounts and made a recommendation to the base commander. In the interest of maintaining unit cohesion and avoiding a prolonged investigation that would distract from mission readiness, he suggested both parties receive formal counseling and the matter be closed without further action. Cassidy read the memorandum 3 times, each reading deepening the cold fury building behind her sternum. Formal counseling. The same administrative slap on the wrist for the woman who was assaulted and the man who assaulted her. A resolution designed to make the problem disappear without anyone having to admit the problem existed. Lieutenant Colonel Fitch called an hour later, her voice tight with professional frustration. I want you to know I oppose this recommendation. But Tidwell has the ear of the garrison commander. They are framing this as a he said, she said situation with no clear evidence. The security footage, still classified as corrupted. I have requested an independent technical review, but that takes time. And Tidwell is pushing for resolution before the review can be completed. Cassidy stared out her office window at the concrete and chain link that surrounded her compound. What happens if I reject the counseling option? Then Crenshaw's counter-complaint moves forward. You could face administrative action for the alleged assault. Your record would carry the investigation even if nothing is substantiated. And Crenshaw walks away clean. So my choices are accept a resolution that treats me as equally culpable or fight and risk my career while he faces nothing. Fitch was quiet for a moment. There's a third option. You could invoke your position. Make calls. Use your rank and your connections to force a different outcome. and prove every stereotype about women in command. That we cannot handle things through proper channels. That we rely on politics instead of process. Sometimes the process is broken, Major. Then we fix the process, not circumvent it. She ended the call and sat alone with the weight of the decision. Her team found her an hour later, gathered in the operations center with expressions ranging from Banks's barely contained rage to Vaughn's cold determination. "We heard," Vaughn said, "about Tidwell's recommendation." Cassidy nodded. "You're not actually considering accepting it." Banks stepped forward, his massive frame vibrating with tension. "Major, this is wrong. Everyone knows it is wrong. You let them sweep this under the rug, and Crenshaw does it again. To someone who does not have your resources. Someone who cannot fight back." "I know. Then fight." Banks's voice cracked with frustration. "Let's help you fight." Cassidy looked at each of them in turn. These were the finest operators she had ever served with. They had followed her into darkness and brought her back out. They would tear down walls for her if she asked. But this was not their fight. It could not be. "If I fight," she said slowly, "I fight through the system. Through regulations. Through evidence and testimony and process. Not through intimidation. Not through force. Because if we become what we are fighting against, we have already lost." The room fell silent. Banks looked like he wanted to punch through a wall, but he held his position. That evening, Cassidy received a message from an address she did not recognize. The sender identified herself as Specialist Rachel Vance, one of the women whose complaints against Crenshaw had been dismissed 2 years earlier. "Major Thorne, I heard what happened to you. I heard you're fighting it. I wanted you to know what happened to me." The message detailed an encounter remarkably similar to Cassidy's. Vance had been a young specialist driving on a base after a weekend pass. Crenshaw had pulled her aside for secondary screening, made comments about her appearance, and when she objected, he had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. She had filed a complaint. A week later, her squad leader informed her that her upcoming promotion board had been postponed indefinitely. A month after that, she withdrew her complaint. The promotion board was rescheduled within days. "I was 23, the message continued. "I was scared. I had no one to back me up. I let him win because I did not know how to fight. But you're different. You have rank. You have people who will stand with you. Please do not let him win again." Cassidy read the message twice, then a third time. 3 women, 3 complaints, 3 silencings. And those were only the ones who had come forward. How many others had simply endured and said nothing? She opened a new message to Lieutenant Colonel Fitch. "I am rejecting the counseling resolution. I want a formal hearing. I want everything on the record. And I want to call witnesses." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vaughn. "Command Sergeant Major Rook just requested a meeting with you. Tomorrow morning. He says he has something you need to see." Cassidy stared at the name. Elias Rook, the senior enlisted advisor to Special Operations Command. A legend in the special operations community with 30 years of service and a reputation for absolute integrity. Why would he want to meet with her? She typed her response. "Tell him I will be there." Whatever was coming, she would face it head-on. Command Sergeant Major Elias Rook had an office that reflected 30 years of service. Flags from units long since redesignated. Photos with generals and sergeants major who had shaped the modern special operations community. A shadow box containing medals that told stories classified above most security clearances. He stood when Cassidy entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk with the economy of movement that marked career operators. "Close the door, Major." She did, then took the offered seat. Rook remained standing for a moment, studying her with eyes that had evaluated thousands of soldiers over 3 decades. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. He sat down and placed a tablet on the desk between them. "I was in my vehicle at the Gruber Road Gate 3 days ago," he said, "returning from a meeting at Popefield. I saw the last 30 seconds of your encounter with Sergeant Crenshaw." Cassidy felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. "You witnessed it. I witnessed him put his hands on you. I witnessed you go down. I witnessed you get up and leave without retaliation." Rook's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I also witnessed the security camera that Crenshaw claims was malfunctioning. It was operational. I saw the recording light. He turned the tablet toward her and pressed play. The footage was crisp, clear, and damning. It showed Cassidy standing calmly beside her vehicle. It showed Crenshaw stepping into her space. It showed the shove, the fall, the moment of impact. The audio picked up his voice, the slur he had used, every word preserved in digital clarity. "How did you get this?" Cassidy asked. Rook's expression did not change. "I made a request through SOCOM channels. The original footage was archived before anyone could corrupt it. What Crenshaw deleted was a copy. The primary recording is stored on a separate server that base security does not control." Cassidy watched the footage loop back to the beginning. 3 days of doubt and rumors and institutional resistance, and the truth had been preserved all along. "There's more," Rook continued. He swiped to a new screen. "After I saw what happened, I pulled Crenshaw's complete service record. Not the summary file. The full jacket, including selection board evaluations." He handed her a printed document. Cassidy scanned it, her eyes catching on highlighted passages. Crenshaw's third Special Forces selection attempt. 8 years ago, the evaluation board had included extensive notes on his psychological profile. Demonstrates persistent hostility toward female service members. Views women in combat roles as fundamentally illegitimate. Recommend permanent bar from Special Operations Selection. Attitude incompatible with modern SOF culture and joint operational requirements. The board member who wrote those notes, Rook said quietly, was Colonel Patricia Sawyer, your predecessor in command of your current unit. Cassidy looked up sharply. Crenshaw was rejected from Special Operations in part because a woman evaluated him and found him unfit. He has spent 8 years watching women advance in the career field he was denied. He does not know the connection to you specifically, but his hatred is not random. It is personal. It is aimed at every woman who succeeded where he failed. The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. Crenshaw's aggression at the gate had not been mere bullying. It had been the release valve for years of festering resentment, aimed at a target he assumed could not fight back. "What do you want me to do with this?" Cassidy asked. Rook leaned back in his chair. "That is your choice, Major. You could use this to bury him quietly. Make calls, apply pressure, have him transferred somewhere remote where he cannot hurt anyone else. It will be over in a week. Or, where you take this to a formal hearing. You put everything on the record. You let the system work the way it is supposed to work, in the light where everyone can see. It will be harder, longer, more painful, but it will set a precedent that cannot be ignored." Cassidy thought about Specialist Vance, about Sergeant Pruitt, about the women whose names she did not know, who had encountered Wade Crenshaw and been silenced by a system designed to protect its own. "I want the hearing," she said. "I want everyone to see exactly what he is." Rook nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "Then you will have it. I will submit my witness statement to Lieutenant Colonel Fitch today. And Major, there's one more thing." He reached into his desk and withdrew a formal document. "Charges," he said. "Assault, false official statement, conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer. Fitch is filing them this afternoon. Crenshaw will be served by end of day, and he still does not know who I am. He knows you're a major assigned to JSOC. He thinks you are a staff officer, someone he can outlast." Rook allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. He is about to receive the full charge sheet. Your name will be on it, along with your title and position. Commander, Special Operations Task Force. Cassidy imagined the moment Crenshaw would read those words. The dawning realization that the woman he had shoved to the ground, the woman he had called every degrading name he could summon, commanded warriors who made his failed special operations dreams look like children's games. "Good," she said. Rook stood, signaling the meeting's end. "One more thing, Major. Colonel Sawyer. She retired 4 years ago, but I took the liberty of contacting her. She remembers Crenshaw, and she would very much like to attend the hearing." Cassidy rose and extended her hand. "Thank you, Sergeant Major. Do not thank me yet." Rook shook her hand with a grip like iron. "The hard part is just beginning. Wade Crenshaw was in the security forces break room when the military police found him. He had been telling the story again, embellishing details, describing how he had put some hysterical woman in her place. The laughter died when two MPs appeared in the doorway with formal expressions and a sealed envelope. Sergeant First Class Crenshaw, you are hereby served with notification of charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He took the envelope with steady hands, still confident, still certain this was a formality he could navigate. He had beaten complaints before. He knew how the game was played. Then he opened the document and read the name of his accuser. Major Cassidy Thorne, Commander, Special Operations Task Force. The words blurred and reformed, refusing to make sense. Commander, Special Operations. The woman in the Honda Civic with the split lip and the calm eyes. The woman he had shoved to the ground and called every foul name he could summon. She commanded a Tier 1 unit. She outranked him by a galaxy. She operated in a world he had tried 3 times to enter and been rejected from each time. His hands began to shake. The news traveled through Fort Bragg faster than any rumor Crenshaw had planted. By evening, the narrative had reversed completely. The entitled spouse had become a special operations commander. The hysterical woman had become one of the most decorated officers in JSOC. The assault that Crenshaw had laughed about had become a career-ending catastrophe. Cassidy learned about his reaction from Vaughn, who delivered the report with undisguised satisfaction. Apparently, he went white as a sheet, stood there holding the paper like it had caught fire in his hands. His buddies cleared out of that break room in about 30 seconds. Cassidy nodded, but felt no triumph. This was not about destroying Wade Crenshaw. It was about ensuring he could never do this again. That evening, her father arrived at Fort Bragg. She found him waiting outside her compound, standing beside a rental car in civilian clothes that somehow still looked like a uniform. Command Sergeant Major Thomas Thorne, retired, had spent 32 years in the Army. He had served in conflicts that spanned 3 decades. He had trained soldiers who became generals, and he had spent most of Cassidy's career quietly disapproving of every choice she made. Dad, she stopped a few feet away, uncertain of the protocol for this encounter. I heard what happened. He spoke without preamble, his voice carrying the gruff cadence she remembered from childhood. I heard what you were doing about it. News travels fast. I still have friends in the community. He paused, seeming to struggle with words that did not come naturally. I also heard what I said to you on the phone. I have been thinking about it. Cassidy waited. I was wrong. The admission came out rough, almost painful. You should not have had to identify yourself. You should not have had to prove your rank to avoid being assaulted. I was making excuses for a broken system because it was easier than admitting the system failed you. She felt something shift in her chest, a knot that had been tightening for years beginning to loosen. I spent my whole career believing that if people just worked hard enough, the Army would recognize their worth. Her father continued, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past her shoulder. I told myself that the women who complained about harassment just were not tough enough, that they needed to adapt to the culture instead of expecting the culture to change. And now I watched my daughter get assaulted for driving through a gate. And I watched her fight back the right way, through channels, through process, refusing to take shortcuts, even when shortcuts would have been easier. He finally met her eyes. You are a better soldier than I ever gave you credit for. And I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. Cassidy closed the distance between them. The hug was awkward, unpracticed, 2 people who had forgotten how to reach for each other. But it was real. The hearing is in 2 days, she said when they separated. I know. I want to be there. You do not have to. I know. He straightened his shoulders, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. But I'm going to be there anyway. It is time I started showing up for you the way you deserved all along. They walked together toward the operations building, father and daughter, the silence between them no longer a wall, but a bridge being slowly, carefully constructed. Inside, her team was waiting. Banks stood at attention when she entered, a gesture of respect that spread through the room like a wave. Major, we have something for you, Vaughn said. She handed Cassidy a folder. Inside were printed statements, dozens of them, from operators across the special operations community. Men and women who had served with Cassidy, who had followed her into impossible situations, who wanted the hearing board to know exactly who Wade Crenshaw had chosen as his target. They started coming in this afternoon, Vaughn explained. Word got out about what happened. People wanted to go on record. Cassidy flipped through the pages. Names she recognized, missions she remembered, bonds forged in darkness and blood. Each statement testified to her leadership, her courage, her integrity. At the bottom of the stack was a single page with a familiar signature. Colonel Patricia Sawyer, retired. The woman who had evaluated Crenshaw 8 years ago and found him unfit. Her statement was brief. I rejected Wade Crenshaw from Special Operations because he demonstrated contempt for the women who served alongside him. I see now that my assessment was correct. Major Thorne represents everything Crenshaw could never become. I will be honored to testify on her behalf. Cassidy set the folder down and looked at her team. 2 days, she said. Then we finish this. The hearing convened in a windowless room in the JAG building, the kind of space designed to strip away everything but facts and consequences. A long table at the front held the 3-officer panel that would decide Wade Crenshaw's fate. Lieutenant Colonel Fitch sat at the prosecution table, her case files arranged with surgical precision. Crenshaw sat with his appointed defense counsel, a captain named Briggs who looked like he already knew how this would end. Cassidy took her seat in the front row of the gallery. Her father sat beside her, spine straight, hands folded in his lap. Behind them, the room filled with observers. Command Sergeant Major Rook in his dress uniform. Captain Vaughn and Staff Sergeant Banks in seats near the aisle. Colonel Patricia Sawyer, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, watching Crenshaw with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. And in the back row, nearly invisible Private First Class Danny Ostrowski. The panel president, a colonel from the Inspector General's office, called the hearing to order. Fitch rose and delivered her opening statement with the controlled intensity of a guided missile. She outlined the charges. Assault consummated by battery. False official statement. Conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer. She described the evidence. Security footage that clearly showed Crenshaw initiating physical contact. Audio that captured his words, including the slur that still echoed in official transcripts. Witness statements from observers at the scene. A pattern of behavior documented across multiple complaints spanning years. This is not an isolated incident, Fitch concluded. This is the culmination of a career spent abusing authority and targeting those Sergeant Crenshaw perceived as vulnerable. The evidence will show that he selected Major Thorne precisely because he believed she could not fight back. He was wrong. Captain Briggs offered a defense that felt obligatory rather than convinced. His client had been performing his duties. The situation had escalated due to miscommunication. Sergeant Crenshaw had perceived a threat and responded with minimal force consistent with his training. The words hung in the air, thin and unconvincing. Fitch called her first witness. Command Sergeant Major Elias Rook approached the stand with the measured stride of a man who had testified in proceedings far more consequential than this one. He described what he had witnessed at the gate. The shove, the fall, the slur. His voice carried the weight of 30 years of unimpeachable service. When Briggs attempted to cross-examine, suggesting that Rook's angle of observation might have been impaired, the sergeant major fixed him with a stare that made the captain visibly reconsider his approach. I saw what I saw, counselor. My vision is fine. My memory is fine. And my integrity is not subject to negotiation. Briggs withdrew the question. The security footage played next, projected onto a screen at the front of the room. The panel watched in silence as the events unfolded exactly as Cassidy had described. Crenshaw's face on the screen showed contempt, then aggression, then satisfaction as she hit the ground. The audio captured every word, every inflection, every syllable of the slur that had followed her down. When the footage ended, Cassidy glanced at Crenshaw. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. The confidence that had carried him through 16 years of evading consequences had finally cracked. Fitch called Private First Class Ostrowski. The young soldier walked to the witness stand like a man approaching his own execution. His hands trembled as he took the oath. But when Fitch asked him to describe what he had witnessed, his voice steadied. "I saw Sergeant Crenshaw shove the woman. She did not do anything to provoke it. She just asked to speak to his supervisor. He put his hands on her and pushed her down. Then he called her a word I will not repeat in this room." Briggs rose for cross-examination. "Private Ostrowski, is it not true that Sergeant Crenshaw is your direct supervisor?" "Yes, sir." "And is it not true that contradicting him could have serious consequences for your career?" Ostrowski looked directly at Crenshaw for the first time. "Yes, sir, it could. But I watched him assault someone and then lie about it. I watched him try to destroy her reputation to cover up what he did." He turned back to the panel. "I joined the Army because I believed in doing the right thing. If I stay silent now, I am no better than he is." The room went quiet. Briggs had no further questions. Colonel Sawyer testified next, describing her evaluation of Crenshaw 8 years earlier. She read from her original assessment, the words landing like hammer blows. Persistent hostility. Contempt for female service members. Incompatible with special operations culture. "I recommended he be permanently barred from selection," she said. "I believe then, as I believe now, that Wade Crenshaw represents the worst of what military culture can produce when accountability fails." Crenshaw's face had gone from pale to flushed, his fists clenched beneath the table. Fitch called one final witness, Specialist Rachel Vance, who had driven 4 hours to testify about her own encounter with Crenshaw 18 months earlier. She described the assault, the threat, the sudden change to her deployment orders that had coerced her into silence. "I withdrew my complaint because I was afraid," she said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "I let him win because I thought I was alone. But I am not alone anymore." The prosecution rested. Briggs offered a brief defense, calling a character witness who spoke in generalities about Crenshaw's years of service. The testimony fell hollow against the weight of what had preceded it. The panel president announced a recess for deliberation. As the officers filed out, Cassidy remained at her seat, her father's hand resting briefly on her shoulder. Whatever happened next, she had done everything right. Now she had to trust the system to do the same. The deliberation lasted 47 minutes. Cassidy spent them in the hallway outside the hearing room, surrounded by people who had come to stand with her, but giving her space to breathe. Her father paced near the water fountain, old habits surfacing under stress. Vaughn and Banks stood like sentinels by the door, their presence a silent declaration of solidarity. When the panel president emerged and announced that the board had reached a verdict, the hallway emptied back into the hearing room with the quiet urgency of people who understood that history was about to be written. Cassidy took her seat. Crenshaw stood at the defense table, his posture rigid, his face a mask that could not quite hide the fear beneath. The panel president, Colonel Westbrook, surveyed the room before speaking. "Sergeant First Class Wade Crenshaw, this panel has reviewed all evidence presented and heard testimony from multiple witnesses. On the charge of assault consummated by battery, we find you guilty. On the charge of making a false official statement, we find you guilty. On the charge of conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer, we find you guilty." The words landed in the silence like stones dropped into still water. Crenshaw swayed slightly, his hand gripping the edge of the table. Colonel Westbrook continued, "This panel recommends reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and a dishonorable discharge from the United States Army. Additionally, this matter will be referred to civilian authorities for potential criminal prosecution." Cassidy heard Banks exhale behind her, a sound of released pressure that had been building for days. The panel president turned to address the room. "Before we adjourn, I want to make a statement for the record. The conduct displayed by Sergeant Crenshaw represents a fundamental betrayal of the values this institution claims to uphold. His actions were not an isolated lapse in judgment. They were the product of years of unchecked behavior enabled by systemic failures in accountability. This panel hopes that today's verdict sends a clear message. The United States Army will not tolerate those who prey upon the people they are sworn to protect. He paused, his gaze settling on Cassidy. Major Thorne, your conduct throughout this process has exemplified the highest standards of military professionalism. You had every opportunity to circumvent the system, to use your position and connections to resolve this matter quietly. Instead, you trusted the process, even when that process seemed designed to fail you. Your integrity has strengthened this institution. Cassidy nodded, not trusting her voice. Colonel Westbrook announced adjournment, and the room began to stir. People rose from their seats, conversations breaking out in hushed tones. Lieutenant Colonel Fitch approached Cassidy with a handshake that conveyed more than words could. Then Crenshaw's voice cut through the noise. This is wrong. The room went still. Crenshaw had pushed past his defense counsel and was moving toward the center of the room, his face contorted with rage that had finally broken free of its constraints. You ruined me. He pointed at Cassidy, his hand shaking. You ruined everything. 16 years I gave to this army. 16 years. And you destroyed it in a week because you could not handle being treated like everyone else. 2 MPs moved toward him, but he kept talking, his voice rising. Women like you are what is wrong with this military. You do not earn anything. You just take. You take our slots in selection. You take our promotions. You take everything we built and you call it equality. The MPs reached him, taking positions on either side, but Crenshaw shook them off. I should have known what you were. I should have seen it. But you hid behind your civilian clothes and your little Honda, and you let me walk right into your trap. This was a setup from the start. Cassidy rose from her seat. The room held its breath. She walked toward Crenshaw, stopping just outside arm's reach. The MPs tensed, ready to intervene, but she held up a hand to stay them. Sergeant Crenshaw. Her voice was calm, carrying clearly through the silent room. I did not trap you. I did not set you up. I drove through a gate and asked to speak to your supervisor. That is all. Everything that happened after that was your choice. He opened his mouth to respond, but she continued. You chose to harass me. You chose to assault me. You chose to lie about it. You chose to try to destroy my reputation rather than accept responsibility for your actions. And when faced with the consequences of those choices, you chose to blame everyone except yourself. She took one step closer. You want to know why you failed selection 3 times? It was not because of women. It was not because of politics. It was because the people who evaluated you saw exactly what this room saw today. A man who believes his grievances entitle him to harm others. A man who mistakes cruelty for strength. A man who has spent his entire career proving he does not deserve the uniform he wears. Crenshaw's face had gone from red to purple. His fists clenched at his sides. You think you are better than me, he spat. I do not think about you at all. Cassidy held his gaze without flinching. But I will remember Specialist Vance. I will remember Sergeant Pruitt. I will remember every woman you try to silence. And I will make sure the Army remembers too. She turned her back on him and walked toward her father. Behind her, she heard the MPs finally take hold of Crenshaw's arms as he began shouting again, his words dissolving into incoherent rage. Someone in the gallery began to clap. Then another. Then another. The applause spread through the room, not triumphant but resolute, the sound of people acknowledging that something had finally been set right. Cassidy did not look back. The aftermath unfolded in waves. MPs escorted Crenshaw from the hearing room, his shouts fading down the corridor until a door closed and silence returned. The gallery emptied slowly, people stopping to offer Cassidy handshakes and quiet words of respect before filing out into the Carolina afternoon. Colonel Tidwell found her outside the JAG building. He approached with the stiff posture of a man who knew he owed an apology but had not yet figured out how to deliver it. Major Thorne. He stopped a respectful distance away. I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on incomplete information. I let my relationship with Crenshaw cloud my judgment. That was a failure of leadership on my part. Cassidy studied him for a moment. The easy response would be to accept graciously and move on. But grace without honesty served no one. 3 women filed complaints before me, Colonel. 3 chances to see the pattern. If any of them had been given the benefit of the doubt you gave Crenshaw, we might not be standing here today. Tidwell's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. You are right, and I will have to live with that. He paused. For what it is worth, I have already initiated a review of every complaint filed against personnel under my command in the past 5 years. If there are other cases like this, other people who were failed by my negligence, I intend to find them. It was not absolution, but it was a start. Cassidy nodded. Then I hope you find what you are looking for, Colonel, and I hope you act on it. She walked away before he could respond. Command Sergeant Major Rook intercepted her near the parking lot, his expression carrying something she had not seen before. Warmth, perhaps, or something close to it. Well done, Major. I cannot have done it without the footage you preserved. The footage was evidence. What happened in that room was something else. Rook fell in a step beside her. I have been in this army a long time. I have seen a lot of people with power use it to protect themselves. It is rare to see someone use it to protect others. I was not trying to be rare. I was trying to be right. Rook smiled, a rare occurrence that transformed his weathered face. Same thing, in my experience. They reached her vehicle, where her father stood waiting. Rook extended his hand to the older man. Command Sergeant Major Thorne. It is an honor. Your daughter is one of the finest officers I have encountered in 30 years of service. Her father shook the offered hand, his voice rough. I'm starting to understand that. Rook nodded to them both and walked away, leaving father and daughter alone in the fading light. That was something, her father said. What you did in there, facing him down like that. I learned from watching you. He shook his head. No, that was all you. I never would have had the patience. The discipline. I would have wanted to handle it the fast way, the easy way. You chose the hard way because it was the right way. He turned to face her fully. I spent years thinking you joined Special Operations to prove something to me, to show me I was wrong about women in combat. Cassidy waited, but watching you these past few days, I realized something. You did not do any of this to prove anything to me. You did it because it is who you are. The approval you wanted from me, you never needed it. You were already everything I cannot see. The words hung between them, healing wounds that had festered for years. I did want your approval, Cassidy admitted. For a long time, it was the only thing I wanted. But somewhere along the way, I realized I had to stop waiting for it. I had to become who I was meant to be, whether you saw it or not. I see it now. Her father's voice cracked slightly. I see you. They embraced in the parking lot, a proper embrace this time, the kind they should have shared years ago. When they separated, both of them had wet eyes that neither acknowledged. Her team found them there a few minutes later. Banks had somehow procured a bottle of champagne, which he presented with a grin that split his face. We are celebrating, he announced. No arguments, Major. You could go back to being stoic tomorrow. The cork popped, foam spilling over Banks's hands as Vaughn produced plastic cups from somewhere. They toasted in the parking lot, a small circle of warriors marking a victory that would never appear in any official history. To Major Thorne, Vaughn said, raising her cup, who taught us that the hardest battles are not always fought with weapons. To the women who came before, Banks added, Vance, Pruitt, and the ones we do not know. May this be the last time any of them are silenced. To doing things right, Cassidy said quietly, even when it hurts. They drank, and for a moment, the weight of the past week lifted. There would be more to do, reports to file, policies to change, a deployment to prepare for. But for now, in this parking lot, surrounded by people who had stood with her when standing was hard, Cassidy allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in days. Peace. Later that evening, she received a message from the Sachem Public Affairs office. Her photograph had been added to the Special Operations Command Leadership display. For the first time, her position was publicly acknowledged. Commander, Special Operations Task Force. The first woman to hold the title. She stared at the message for a long time, thinking about all the women who would see that photograph and know that the path existed. That could be walked, that the gate was open. The weeks that followed brought changes that rippled outward from the hearing room, like waves from stone dropped in still water. Wade Crenshaw's court-martial was scheduled for the following month, but his fate was already sealed. The dishonorable discharge would strip him of his pension, his benefits, and the title he had worn for 16 years. Criminal charges for assault were pending in Cumberland County. The man who had believed himself untouchable would spend his remaining years answering for the choices he had made. But the consequences extended far beyond one man. Lieutenant Colonel Fitch called Cassidy with news that arrived like a gift she had not known she was waiting for. The other complainants, she said, Vance, Pruitt, and a third woman named Corporal Inez Delgado, who came forward after hearing about the hearing. Their cases have been reopened. The evidence from your case established a pattern that applies retroactively. Crenshaw is facing additional charges for each of them. What about their careers? The damage he did. Fitch paused. Vance's promotion board has been reinstated. Pruitt's deployment orders are being reviewed. Delgado is receiving a formal apology from her chain of command. It does not undo what happened to them, but it acknowledges that the system failed. Cassidy closed her eyes. 3 women. 3 careers interrupted. 3 lives shaped by one man's cruelty and a system that had looked away. Justice could not erase those years, but perhaps it could prevent the next ones. Colonel Tidwell proved true to his word. His review of past complaints uncovered 2 additional cases where warning signs have been ignored, where accusations have been dismissed without proper investigation. Both were reopened. Both resulted in action against the accused. The message spread through Fort Bragg's security forces like a cold wind. The old rules no longer applied. Policy changes followed. The garrison commander issued new protocols for reporting incidents at access control points. Mandatory camera coverage with redundant storage. Independent review of any complaint involving physical contact. Training modules on recognizing and preventing abuse of authority. The bureaucratic machinery of institutional change ground slowly, but it ground forward. Private First Class Danny Ostrowski received a commendation for his testimony. More importantly, he was selected for a leadership development program that would fast-track his career. Cassidy made a point of finding him in the chow hall one afternoon, sitting down across from him without ceremony. You did something hard, she told him. You told the truth when lying would have been easier. That matters. Ostrowski looked down at his tray, embarrassed by the attention. I should have said something sooner. Before the hearing. What first happened? You said something when it counted. That is what matters. Cassidy held his gaze until he met her eyes. The Army needs people who will stand up, even when it costs them. You proved you were one of those people. Do not forget that. She left him with a handshake and the knowledge that his courage had not gone unnoticed. Specialist Rachel Vance sent a letter that arrived at Cassidy's office on a Tuesday morning. The handwriting was neat, precise, the words carefully chosen. Major Thorne, I do not know how to thank you for what you did. For 2 years, I believed that what happened to me did not matter, that I did not matter. Watching you stand up in that hearing room, watching you refuse to be silenced, something changed in me. I remembered why I joined the Army in the first place. I remembered that the uniform is supposed to mean something. You gave that back to me. I will never forget it. Cassidy read the letter 3 times, then placed it in her desk drawer alongside the statements her team had gathered. Someday, when the weight of command felt too heavy, she would read them again and remember why any of it mattered. Her father returned to his home in Virginia, but something had shifted between them. He called every few days now, conversations that started awkward and gradually found their rhythm. They talked about her work in generalities that respected classification. They talked about his garden, his fishing trips, the small rituals of retirement. They talked about her mother, dead now 15 years, and the ways her absence had shaped them both. I think she would be proud of you, he said one evening. She always knew you would do something important. I was the one who could not see it. She would be proud of both of us, Cassidy replied, for figuring it out eventually. The night before her unit deployed, Cassidy stood at the gate where everything had started. The Gruber Road checkpoint looked different now. New cameras, new signage, a different crew of guards who snapped to attention when they recognized her. She did not stop. She simply drove through the same way she had driven through 100 times before. But as she passed the spot where she had fallen, where gravel had bitten into her palms and a man's hatred had tried to break her, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The gate had not changed. The road had not changed. The mission had not changed. But she had changed Fort Bragg. And Fort Bragg, in its slow and grinding way, had begun to change itself. Tomorrow she would lead her team into darkness, into places that did not exist on any map. She would make decisions that carried the weight of lives. She would do what she had always done, what she had trained her entire career to do. But tonight, she drove through the gate and felt something she had not expected. Gratitude for the system that had finally worked, for the people who had stood beside her, for the chance to prove that integrity was not weakness, that patience was not surrender, that doing things right still mattered in a world that often rewarded those who did not. She drove toward her compound, toward her team, toward the mission waiting on the other side of dawn. There was still work to do. 6 months later, Cassidy Thorne drove through the Gruber Road Gate for the first time since her return from deployment. The mission had been successful. Her team had come home intact. The work they had done in places without names would never be acknowledged publicly, but the people who needed to know understood what had been accomplished. The guard at the checkpoint was young, barely out of training, with the crisp uniform and eager posture of someone still learning the weight of the role. He took her identification card, scanned it, and stiffened when the screen displayed her information. "Welcome home, Major Thorne." His voice carried genuine respect, the kind that could not be faked. "Thank you for your service." She nodded and drove through without incident. No harassment, no suspicion, no hands raised in anger. Just a soldier doing his job and a commander returning to hers. The base had changed in small ways during her absence. New construction near the commissary. Fresh paint on the battalion headquarters building. A banner announcing the upcoming Army birthday celebration. The rhythms of military life continued, indifferent to the dramas that unfolded within them. But some changes ran deeper than paint and construction. She learned from Vaughn that Wade Crenshaw had been convicted at his court-martial 2 months after her deployment began. The dishonorable discharge had been finalized. Criminal proceedings in civilian court had resulted in a guilty plea to simple assault, with 18 months of probation and mandatory anger management counseling. His name had become a cautionary tale, invoked in training sessions and leadership discussions as an example of what happened when accountability failed and then, finally, succeeded. The women he had targeted were rebuilding. Rachel Vance had earned her promotion and was now serving as a squad leader at Fort Hood. Diana Pruitt had requested and received a transfer to a unit where her skills were valued. Ines Delgado had re-enlisted, her faith in the institution restored by the acknowledgement that she had been wronged. The gate incident had become a case study. Cassidy had been asked to speak at 3 leadership conferences, requests she had declined while deployed, but was now considering. The story was not about her. She insisted whenever the subject arose. It was about a system that could fail and then correct itself. It was about the people who had the courage to demand that correction. Her unit gathered for the post-deployment debrief in the operations center, the same room where they had learned of her assault and struggled to contain their fury. Now they sat in quiet satisfaction, the bond between them strengthened by another mission completed, another impossible task accomplished. Vaughn delivered the after-action summary with her usual precision. Banks cracked jokes that made even the most stoic operators smile. The rhythm of the team reasserted itself, familiar and comforting. When the debrief concluded, Cassidy asked them to remain for a moment. "I want to thank you," she said, "not for the mission, for everything before it. For trusting me when I asked you to let the system work. For standing with me when standing was hard. You're the reason I could do this job. Never forget that." Banks raised an imaginary glass. "To Major Thorne, who taught us that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is patience." They laughed, and the sound filled the room with warmth. That evening, Cassidy found her father waiting outside the compound. He had driven down from Virginia without telling her, a surprise that caught her off guard in the best possible way. "You came. I told you I would start showing up." He shrugged, tried to appear casual and failing. "Figured your first day back was a good time to start." They walked together toward the base chapel, where a small ceremony was being held to recognize the unit's return. Her father moved slowly, age catching up with decades of hard service. But his presence beside her felt like something she had waited her whole life to experience. Inside the chapel, the ceremony was brief and dignified. The chaplain offered words of gratitude. The commanding general acknowledged the sacrifices made by those who served in silence. Families embraced soldiers who had been gone too long. When it ended, Cassidy lingered near the door, watching her team disperse into the arms of loved ones. Banks lifted his daughter onto his shoulders. Vaughn embraced a woman Cassidy had never met, their reunion tender and private. Her father stood beside her, silent, witnessing. A knock at the chapel door drew her attention. A young woman in a crisp uniform stood at the threshold, clearly nervous, clearly searching for someone. Major Thorne. The woman stepped forward, her voice wavering slightly. I am Second Lieutenant Amara Osei. I just received orders to begin Special Operations Selection next month. Cassidy studied her. Young, determined, terrified in the way that all new officers were terrified when facing the unknown. I heard about what happened to you, Lieutenant Osei continued. At the gate, and what you did afterward. I wanted to meet you before I left. To tell you that your story is part of why I applied. Cassidy felt something shift in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced reading Rachel Vance's letter. The knowledge that her choices had rippled outward, touching lives she would never fully know. Selection is hard, she said. Harder than anything you have faced. There will be moments when you want to quit. Moments when everyone around you expects you to quit. Lieutenant Osei nodded, her jaw set. Do not quit. Cassidy held her gaze. Not because of me, not because of anyone else. Because you belong there. Because you earned the right to try. And because the women who come after you need to see that the path exists. The young lieutenant straightened, some of her nervousness replaced by resolve. Thank you, Major. I will not let you down. You will not let yourself down. That is what matters. Lieutenant Osei saluted, turned, and walked into the evening. Cassidy watched her go, seeing in her stride the echo of her own journey, the same hunger to prove that capability knew no gender. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. That is your legacy, he said quietly. Not the medals, not the missions. Her, and everyone like her who will come after. Cassidy nodded, her throat tight. The gate was open, and it would stay open. If you connected with this story, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you have witnessed someone standing up for what is right, even when it was hard.